Hello and welcome to Season 5 of Be the Good with Kate Chericello. How are we here already? Honestly, it comes down to that first step. Taking an idea, then taking an action on the idea. Getting on that train, so to speak. And now, over 50 episodes later, here we are. And that's a recurring theme with every guest. We all have the power to make a difference. And once we take the first steps, we can amaze ourselves with what we are capable of and how we can make the world a better place. Be the Good with Kate is all about people doing good in the world while following their passions. Good for their own souls and for others. I get so excited about each and every episode of Be the Good to share with you, and I hope you find inspiration in these people and stories. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, thanks so much for your support. I'm so glad you found Be the Good and would love to hear from you. If you also want to continue to spread these stories of good news, I'd be thrilled if you shared via Instagram, Facebook, email, however you can. Every share, subscriber, like, review on podcast platforms, comment, and so on helps me to share these guests' wonderful works to more people. Thank you for your help in this. Now, on to this week's episode. Let's spread a little more goodness in the world.
Today's guest on Be the Good is the creator and founder of Little Red Fashion. He is the author of children's book, The Little Red Dress. With a strong focus on representation, my guest today states that his mission is to empower the next generation of fashion lovers, leaders, and creators through building stories and characters, along with tools and resources for kids and their grown-ups. You can find him featured in articles such as Why We Must Disrupt Fashion Education, and find him on a plethora of podcasts ranging from fashion to talking about success after international adoption, which many of my listeners know I'm very passionate about adoption as well. He has been an advocate since his first speech on anti-Semitism at the age of 13 and has been a part of many organizations and causes ever since. So Jonathan Joseph, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to dive into things with your audience.
Please tell us more about who you are and what do you do in your own words.
Sure, absolutely. So I often refer to myself now as a recovering consultant, having been a consultant in both the private sector and charitable sector for many years. And now I run Little Red Fashion, which is the first fashion education company focused on children K through 12. We have a publishing division, which produces books like our first title, The Little Red Dress, which is the first augmented reality kids book about fashion and history, which is super exciting. And I came through this journey in a very circumlocutive way. I think as many of your listeners will probably appreciate, the journey from point A to point B is rarely linear. And in my case, that is absolutely true. To backtrack and start at the beginning, I have always considered myself a storyteller and a narrative specialist in many ways. As a consultant, that meant helping my clients in the private sector and in charities learn to tell their stories better, the stories of their missions better. And now at Little Red Fashion, it's about telling the stories of the fashion industry better and using fashion as a lens to teach kids about the world around them and also empower the industry to right so many of its various systemic wrongs, whether that be in relation to DE&I, sustainability, or really access to capital, especially for young designers and those who are really trying to get their foot in the door. I started my work, my first job was actually as a religion teacher in my synagogue when I was like 14 years old. I started right after my bar mitzvah doing all that. And I sort of realized that I am definitely the son of a professor because I also like to teach and I like to share my knowledge with others. And so, I started running with that when I was very young, doing keynote speech introductions, doing panel conversations for the LGBTQ community, working with the Anti-Defamation League, doing workshops with my classmates and others in surrounding school districts and things like that. And this was, only a few years after the brutal murder of Matthew Shepard. So it was definitely a different time than we find ourselves in now. For me, as I guess old hat, as it were, I see so much progress that we've made, particularly in uplifting historically marginalized communities, whether they be BIPOC communities as well as queer communities. And I think, there's obviously always a long way to go, but I think it's also important to acknowledge the progress we have made in the past decades in trying to do the work that I've been doing since then. I transitioned my public speaking roles and work with nonprofit organizations into advisement after that. And I just started freelancing, really. First began with storytelling through grant writing, then it started to do morph into business plans and marketing, and really just, I was spreading my wings in how to storytell. And I found myself working for a number of nonprofit organizations, falling into fundraising management and strategic advisement to boards of directors for community-based organizations, with a focus particularly on medical charities. And then I went to Columbia for my master's in fundraising management, where I focused on what would have been termed philanthrocapitalism, or finding ways for the third sector and the private sector to work more collaboratively to achieve social impact at scale. And in that work, I ended up also crossing over into the private sector and strategically advising a number of startups ranging from legal cannabis to food products to luxury women's wear. As a lifelong armchair fashion historian and lover of fashion, that experience within the industry, doing everything from capital raising and activities to co-designing, textile sourcing, and everything else, really gave me a really nice view of the industry that I loved and had always wanted to be a part of growing up. But as with many things, sometimes when you get what you think you want, it's not always what is best for you. And so after a number of years doing some work within the fashion world, I was faced with seeing a lot of the systemic issues that I addressed through Little Red Fashion. And they bothered me, particularly as someone who has been a lifelong activist, as someone who comes from many historically marginalized groups, as someone who lives with cerebral palsy, as someone who is a queer individual, as someone who is a transracial adoptee, and had a mother who was, a plus size woman. I just realized that there needed to be a change in how we empower the next generation so that we can break these generational cycles, because just like people, I believe that industries have generational curses too. And fashion is very much one of them. And given its forefront of the media and the way that we consume media, and that it's a part of everything we all do, no matter who we are, because we all wear clothes, but especially for younger people with the media they consume, and media literacy is a big part of what I do as well. I wanted to be a part of that change. And I realized that creating stories and solutions and resources for children that were interested in fashion, that showcase an inclusive world without necessarily being dogmatic or preachy, it was important. And dovetailing lessons about fashion for kids who are interested in it with broader lessons about things like empathy and overcoming obstacles and challenges, I really felt that there was a gap in the market, in the sense that in writing this book, which all started as a result of taking a break from one of my fundraising clients. We were in the middle of a $5 million raise, and I was going crazy with this application for them. And my business partner and best friend, Ryan, said, take a step back. You're going to take the day off. We all need sometimes those friends who will just tap us on the shoulder and be like, okay, you need a break. And I am a notorious workaholic. I am also, and that is not good. And I have thankfully been blessed with a very supportive network. And in that space, I was able to come up with this story and finish this story, because it had been lingering in bits and pieces. Anyone who's listening that's a writer will know sometimes writing happens in fits and starts, and you'll have, fragments of drafts here and there. And he said, you know what, take the day off, finish that book that you started when you were still working with clients. It was a really good thing. Let's work on that. So that day off was the day that I finished the first draft of The Little Red Dress, because I wanted to tell the story of how clothes come to be. I wanted kids to understand, when they look at something in the store, how it got there, the many hands that it has passed through, and the many lives that clothes lead, not just when we encounter them, but before they get to us and after they leave us, whether that's through a consignment shop, a vintage store, a museum, if it's an archival piece. And so in doing that, I realized I was building a universe similar to any other creator. And I wanted to build a universe that was the type of fashion world that 10-year-old me wanted to see, and that 30-something-year-old me was clearly annoyed that I wasn't seeing, which is why I left. And so as I was finishing that first draft and then working through second, third, fourth, fifth drafts, I said, there's something more here. This is not just one book. I immediately had an idea for another book. And I said, okay, Little Red Dress is great. Maybe there's Little Red Soccer Kit. Maybe there's Little Red Kits, and we can talk to the kids rather, who don't think they're into fashion. A lot of people have this very narrow definition of fashion and think that if they're not into runways and couture and Paris and Milan and London, they're not into fashion. But they collect soccer kits or jerseys, or they can collect sleek sneakers. And broadening this definition of fashion to this big tent philosophy makes one really realize just how much fashion can be a lens to exploring almost any other discipline you can think of. And that's when the real magic happened, because I realized that I was onto something that was much bigger than one book, a series of books. It was filling an educational resource gap that's generations overdue.
When you wrote the book, was there a market that had already been explored in kids' books focused on fashion? Had there been other books like it, or was this pretty much the first? Okay.
Yes and no, in the sense that fashion for children's books prior is very often like if it's not the main driver of it may drive a plot, right? But it's often ancillary in the sense that they're not really meant as stories to teach kids how fashion as an industry works or as a field can be explored. Often it's just an anecdote or an ancillary component of a plot line, or it's just a plot device. I will say, for example, though, Eva Chen from Instagram definitely has her series that's fantastic, that touches on the power of fashion, but again, uses fashion in a way that we do, but isn't so on the nose. For me, I want to appeal to the kids who want to learn about fashion and the kids who want to learn but are bored with a lot of the stuff that they're already getting. That's my thing. I think at face value, when you hear about Little Red Fashion, you think, oh, okay, so this is for kids who just want to be a part of fashion and be a fashion designer. Yes, but also might be a future stylist, might be a future marketer, might be a future textile specialist and be really into STEM and might invent the next Kevlar or the next spacesuit. When the spacesuit was originally developed by NASA, the seamstresses who created it were actually from Playtex, the bra company, because they were the only ones with the technical prowess to have seam allowances so tiny that they wouldn't cause a hole in a spacesuit. And so, seeing the world through a fashion lens is really what the common denominator is. And because clothing is so universal, it can be used to build bridges of understanding with other complex topics or issues, even if you don't think of yourself as a fashion person. So I think for me, it's also about just broadening what it means to say fashion.
Well, that makes so much sense, because thinking back to my childhood, I was very much in the arts. So that is there's lots of costumes and that idea of fashion and that world and learning history. But it wasn't until I was an adult that I randomly would read or hear piecemeal about the actual everything else. And it's like you said, even just that one NASA story, there's so many of those stories, and just about all these details and how fashion fits into cultures and now, and like you said, finding the new ways of using fabrics and what kind of fabrics you can come up with. That's amazing. So I love that you are focusing on the kids and teaching them, but as you said, not preachy. I love when you said that.
Yes, absolutely. I truly believe that fashion is for everyone. And I also believe, in today's political climate, it's very easy to be polarized one way or another. And as someone who spent the greater part of my early life in activist spaces, there comes a certain point when I decided that activist circuitry is not necessarily always the most productive circuitry to be running when you're trying to make an impact. And while there is a time and a place for it, and it is certainly a skill that I think every activist should have, is stepping into that space of righteous indignation and anger over injustices X, Y, or Z, it is not a recipe for a peaceful life. And it is not necessarily a recipe for achieving forward-moving good beyond your immediate circle, beyond your immediate echo chamber, because many of us fall into those, self-included. It is human nature. And so when I think about leaving generational impact, and when I think about the types of messages that I want to leave for the next generation through the work that we do at Little Red Fashion, it is not my job and it is not my purview to dictate what any one family, child, parent, caregiver, grown-up and how they want to dialogue with those children in their lives goes. It's not up for me to do that. What it is for me to do is to use fashion as a way for them to broker difficult conversations or learn about themselves and their background and their culture and their community. And by providing at least something for everyone, then we are able to reach as many people as possible through the universal language that is fashion. And that includes, as I said, kids who don't even realize they are into fashion, even if they are, and grown-ups too. One of the wonderful side effects of this work has been the fact that, if you can explain something to a child, adults tend to get it as well.
Very true, for sure. It's like you hear all the stories about parents doing math homework with kids and being like, I never knew this, or history class, or whatever it is. So never too late, right?
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me about some good news moments. Speaking of all of these great things that come from opening our eyes to new insights and new ways, some good news moments over the years, either from the book or from your greater work in this industry.
Sure. I mean, oh gosh, I've had so many blessings in my life when it comes to my professional career. Some of the earliest and most formative for me were definitely, let's see. Well, for one, as someone who does love public speaking, I will point, and if anyone listening, if you're an educator, God bless you, A, but B, always being on the lookout for those students who show an inclination towards certain things, particularly if they involve things like public speaking, which is statistically the number one fear most people have. I was very lucky to have teachers who recognized that I was good at it and would put me in different programs and incubators and things like this to build my skills in that arena. And I was invited to be part of a global leadership summit that was put together by a congressional body at the time. I was 18 and 19. And I went to Vienna, Budapest, Prague, China, and was doing work in tandem with that group, doing things like keynote speech introductions for members of the State Department and things like that. I remember giving my first, State Department keynote introduction for Colin Powell. And so I just remember that sort of being a very formative memory in terms of the power of words and the power of speech writing and the power of again, storytelling, to bring it back to my common denominator of all things I do, whether it's in a grant, a balance sheet, or a storybook, is storytelling. And so that's definitely one. Another one, of course, is finishing the book. Starting a company just before COVID hit was not in the plan. None of us could have seen it coming, and learning to roll with the punches and produce a book through a pandemic and a lockdown was definitely a journey. There was definitely unseen delays, but the sheer fact that we were able to create a first in fashion history, which is the first augmented reality kids book about fashion ever, is absolutely one of my biggest wins. And getting support from stalwart figures within the fashion industry like Fern Malice and Iris Apfel has definitely obviously been amazing. And right now we're really at that point where every other day is a blessing, because we've been building very diligently and slowly this growing organic community of people who believe in our vision and what we're trying to put out there. And it's just growing every day. And so every day there's someone who's either leaving a comment about how they love the book. We were able to, in our first cycle of our literacy program, which is our fiscally sponsored program that allows us to give away copies of the book that are sponsored by generous donors like the Tremaine Foundation and in other individuals. We were able to give away 300 copies of The Little Red Dress to children in our partner programs. We have partnered with Reading Partners, Horizons, and Reading is Fundamental to be able to get free copies of the first augmented reality kids book about fashion to as many kids as we can across the country. And we are looking in 2023 to be expanding to children's hospitals as well to get free copies of our resources there. So that's been really great. And then as of this week, we are wrapping up our first workbook that accompanies The Little Red Dress, which is a third grade reading, writing, and literacy workbook that hits every non-STEM Common Core standard in the literacy strands for third grade, using fashion as the lens to teach about phonics, teach about conjunctions, teach about glossaries, teach about really all of the characters that we've built through our little universe in The Little Red Dress. Because as I mentioned before, that non-preachy, non-dogmatic angle, we simply present our diverse cast of characters. And anyone who takes a look at our Kirkus review will see that the critics definitely agree in that we showcase a very broad range of characters. And now our job is to really flesh them out as they will be reappearing in different parts of their lives throughout our universe at Little Red Fashion, including Kiki, our model, who is both a model and a photographer, as well as a type 1 diabetic. And then we have, of course, Sadie, who is our fashion historian, who rescues the little red dress from the consignment shop and takes it to be repaired and showcased at the museum. She's our curator character. And through that and being able to do that, has been a journey for me. As I said, I love storytelling. I will freely admit that writing a workbook was not the type of storytelling I ever really thought I would be doing. But through these reading passages, we are able to, again, really drive home really intense messages of diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability in really approachable ways that are not dogmatic, even if it's as simple, for example, as having a fill-in-the-blank passage that is centered around Black hair and Black hair care and the experience in when a woman goes into a salon and has to write a complaint letter because the stylist didn't know how to handle her hair. And it's these not so obvious ways that we look to use fashion and beauty as a tool for building up the future instead of repeating these generational cycles of toxicity. I think kids are so much smarter than we give them credit for, and creating a media literate generation is extremely important. And part of that is making sure that they understand that when they see a manufactured message, that they know not only that it's manufactured, but that they have a role and a say in what messages they consume.
Mm-hmm. I love that this is all, there's or not all, but so much of this impact that you're currently focused on is coming from a children's book. And it just really is a great reminder too to listeners that the inspiration, the teaching can come from so many different sources and not always the ones that are the most obvious and in our faces, right? It's a children's book and it's teaching so much. And I mean, I'm sure you could also, I can think back to books I read at the age of 5 and 6 that have always stuck with me. And so you creating this, what is that? Is that the workbook?
No, this is one of my favorites. This is my original copy from when I was a little kid. I always keep it with me. So, I'm definitely influenced by so many kids' books. I mean, I was an Eric Carle kid. I was a very big fan of Eric Carle, Ludwig Bemelman, and Madeline, of course, was a very big Madeline fan. Even within the Little Red Dress, I would say our illustration style is definitely very much informed by the world of fashion illustration itself, to pay homage to it, of course. And the augmented reality piece was very important as well, because frankly, when it comes to the mainstream publishers, they use it like a gimmick. It's a gimmick. Okay. I don't, as an independent publisher, I have no problem saying this because I'm not in bed with any of these large publishers. I don't think anyone really cares if Thomas the Tank Engine goes across your dining room table. I don't think anybody really cares if Iron Man circles around your living room. But I do think people care if you can take a kid's book that children as young as 4 enjoy and can create through the app an experience that kids as old as 12 enjoy. Nice. That's the kind of thing people care about, because you have longevity of resources. How many parents listening, or uncles, aunts, gunkles, grown-ups, have bought a kid a book? The kid likes the book, okay, they read it once, and then the book is done, right? It's a sunk cost. The beauty of augmented reality, and why I wanted to focus on that with the 12 titles that are like the Little Red Dress, that are coming down the pipeline, to say nothing of our non-augmented reality offerings that we are working on, which I'll dive into in a minute, is that we can update apps all the time, and we can add dynamic resources over time. And one of the projects we're currently in negotiations for actually involves breaking open the archive of Bonnie Cashin. For those of you who are not familiar with Bonnie Cashin, she is probably one of the most important designers in American history that you don't know about. She is the co-founder of Coach. She was responsible for the first commercial passenger flight aviation uniforms for American Airlines. She invented layering. I am a big fan of layering. If you like layering, Bonnie Cashin, Concept of hardware on a handbag, Bonnie Cashin. The classic toggle closure on a Coach bag, that's Bonnie Cashin, inspired by the convertible that she drove around Los Angeles that was holding down her convertible top. And she would order them directly from the industrial manufacturers. You know, and throughout the book, we're able to, again, create these experiences where in concert with groups and archives and institutions, we will be able to rotate through and change things over time, creating a dynamic resource. So, you know, yes, is it a premium product in the sense that it's a $27.99 kids book? Yes, but it's a $27.99 kids book that gets value added over time and can appeal to your 4-year-old and your 12-year-old and bring them together, because sometimes they want to read with each other. I think, you know, using storytelling and technology, you know, instead of this anxiety-ridden relationship that I think a lot of adults have with technology and children, which to some extent is absolutely warranted. I think it's not a matter of saying my kids should have no screen time. I think it should be, what is the screen time they have doing for them? And how is it a resource dense? I often talk about resource density. How resource dense is that screen time? And how can we leverage it to really improve educational outcomes? Because we see with the data, especially for neurodivergent children, I myself have ADHD, my co-founder is dyslexic, you know, how can neurodivergent children better engage with text? Well, actually digital formats work really well for them. And with augmented reality environments, because you can hold your phone up and be walking around a digital exhibition, or you can have a runway in your living room that you're watching the Little Red Dress walk down the runway with crowd reactions that teach about the contributions of people like Eleanor Lambert to the Battle of Versailles, or Eunice Johnson and the Ebony Fashion Fair, or Pat Cleveland. Those are the types of things that reluctant readers often get engaged with, because it's something different. And someone with ADHD, that ability to even just like get up and wiggle around and like explore it is really beneficial and does hold interest and maintains better learning outcomes. And so pushing augmented reality from gimmick to resource is a very big part of my mission. I'm very excited with the work we'll be doing with Dr. Stephanie Lake from the Bonnie Cashin Archive on a couple things, one of which is, for example, a deck of cards with prompting questions to talk about some of the core philosophies that were central to Bonnie Cashin's work and the concept of Cashinism, and then using that to create, through QR codes on the back of each card, interactive museum exhibition spaces with our never-before-seen archival information that tie to each card. So that's 27-room museum in a box, basically. And so pushing the envelope in terms of these kinds of resources and using fashion for its resource density as a use case, I think is really important in just pushing the future of augmented reality as education technology as far as it can go. Because right now, I, for one, am very unimpressed with what these multi-billion-dollar juggernauts are doing when it comes to AR. I don't think it's ethical to just slap augmented reality on a book and charge people $18 for a subpar experience. I think that parents, educators, school districts, and anyone who has a vested interest in really the next generation, I think we want more for them. And I think the problem is that people just don't know that people like me and my team are doing things like this, because we're up against multi-billion-dollar advertising budgets, so they can sell you a gimmick.
I mean, I'm learning so much sitting here, and you know, I feel like I'm surrounded by a lot of children in my life, but that I don't know any of this. Like there's so much out there. So thank you also for this is so educational for us too. And wow, talk about being busy. You are nonstop, aren't you?
I am. I do sleep, I swear, like a good 7-8 hours a night. I do.
That's
balance
good.
is everything.
But I have to tell you, I wrote this down because I said I have to say this out loud in this interview. At the bottom of your website, I did not miss the oh so relatable footnote that says, I quote, "Powered by coffee, a lot of coffee, and pathological optimism." Said, I know I'm gonna like you, and I hadn't even met you yet.
It's true. It is true. I was adopted from Colombia, so like the coffee thing is definitely like in the blood.
In your blood, yeah.
You know, I have my morning French press every morning. That's my thing. That's my me time. I'm sure a lot of listeners can relate. Like, the house is quiet. You sit there with your cup of coffee, just breathing, getting into your day. Yeah, I love coffee.
Wonderful. So going along with that, what kind of mantras, sayings, quotes do you have that help you through each day and the hard times?
Oh boy, I have a couple. So I've been a
Yeah.
Buddhist for 20 years. My first company called Art of Dharma was a Buddhism-based mindfulness media company similar to Elephant Journal. We started like user-submitted content model way back in 2009, or 2009 to 2014. By the end of our tenure, we were reaching about 12 million people a month. So very much big into mantras and mindfulness in the Western Buddhist tradition. I'm a Mahayana Buddhist. I was raised Jewish and Catholic. And so for me, I have a couple mantras. One of them, of course, is just the simple phrase, infinite compassion. Like if you have that moment where you're about to be triggered by something, or you catch yourself about to engage in like a cyclical pattern that's not going to serve you in some way, infinite compassion works really well, because it's either going to go outwards towards the person that's triggering you or inwards towards the thing in yourself that's being triggered. And you can kind of remove some of the guilt, pain, shame from it by having that infinite compassion towards yourself, which tends to be really motivating. So that's one of my favorites. Also, I know just the zeitgeist, someone listening is probably trying to manifest some money or something abundance-wise. So one that I teach my friends all the time that seems to work for them and myself, the universe is my bank. Is a really nice affirmation because it pushes you out of lack mindset. And I think that's really beneficial for a lot of people as well. And then I will say, on a more Buddhist specific note, there is the Heart Sutra in general. So the Heart Sutra really is a very short text, not really a mantra. There is a mantra at the end of it, Gate Gate Parasam Gate Bodhisvaha. And roughly translated, it's like gone, gone, gone beyond, gone to the other shore, meaning like you've crossed the waters of nirvana and you have now, you're now in that peacefulness. Now, it's a very dense text. It is definitely not like a beginner Buddhist construct, but there are a number of really great books. There's one particular by Redfern that really dives into it on a granular level. What I like about it and what I think is really beneficial is it calls you to realize that things are neither good nor bad, they just are. And I say that fully cognizant of the many struggles people face from various, intersectional realities and historically marginalized groups. But there's this Buddhist concept called upeksha, or equanimity. We might in the West call it even keeledness. Like when something good happens, you're like, yay, I'm celebrating my win, but you're not letting it go to your head. And if something bad happens, you're not, letting it really eat away at you, but you're acknowledging it and letting it pass. And upeksha is really my goal with studying the Heart Sutra. I've been studying it for years. It's one of my favorites. So anyone who's really trying to like de-trigger themselves, that's a good place to start digging. So those are two mantras and a longer text / construct that I think might be beneficial.
Oh, fantastic. And I have things to look up now too. Excellent.
Yes, I might have the cover of the book.
Yeah.
If I do.
If you're listening to this,
as you can see, I have no.
Go to YouTube. Yeah, you have all your props around all your books.
All my books. The Heart Sutra. Right. It goes line by line through it in Sanskrit. It's fantastic. By Red Pine. I'm sorry, translated a commentary by Red Pine. I've given away this book so many times. I just keep buying it. It's one of those.
Fantastic. Oh, I look forward to looking it up. Hey, Jonathan, if I have one more question for you, what would you tell someone who wanted to make a difference, who had, like, you were obviously so passionate about so many things and you found a way to tie it all together into this career? And what would you say to someone who just doesn't know how to start, but they want to make a difference?
The first thing I would tell that person is to sit. Sit and listen to your own breathing for as long as you can stand. And in that space, figure out what aligns with you in terms of, if you're a multi-potentialite like me and a million different fires are going on and you want to put them all out, it's not about putting them all out at once. Where can you start with what you have now. Maybe what you have now is work to do on silencing the buzz. I think a lot of people are so anxious to make a change that they just jump into something without that forethought. So I'm a very big proponent of sitting, collecting yourself, and seeing what you want to change and why. Because in identifying the why you want to change something, you'll be able to separate it from ego, or something I see a lot, from procrastination. Because for some people, procrastination actually takes the form of putting out other people's fires so you don't have to focus on your own. And so sitting with yourself to question, why do I feel this compulsion to change X, Y, or Z, so that you can start on the right foot. And if you determine in sitting that, oh, you know what, actually, I don't actually want to change this. I just want to do something because there's something else in me that it's deeper that I haven't quite gotten to. And maybe you'll find that what you want to fix is actually a manifestation of something that you need to heal in the inner child. And then what you can do is use that to move forward and say, okay, so that's what I did, right? With Little Red Fashion, I healed, AFO leg brace wearing, long sock having me, and my relationship with embodiment of self through fashion as the intermediary. And I heal that by creating things that 9 and 10-year-old me would have loved. And by extension, it resonates with 9 and 10-year-olds now, because they're having those same feelings of navigating their embodiment and their selves as they develop. And so sit. I know that is like not the most expected answer, maybe. And I'm sure plenty of people listening are like, okay, but what else? But really, I cannot underscore enough how important it is, because from direct experience, if I had done a little bit more of that earlier in my life, particularly around the age of like 19, 20, after my mother passed away from metastatic breast cancer, I would have better processed my grief and been a much more effective leader for certain periods of my time, and have saved myself a lot of grief, because I would have put my own fires out instead of putting other people's out. Part of that earlier, that I mentioned that activist circuitry, part of the reason now retrospectively that I feel that I fell so hardcore into that mindset, which had its benefits in certain ways, but part of the problem was that it also causes burnout. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners are struggling with burnout. Most of us are after this pandemic. And I say after, even though it's still going on, but you know what I mean. You have to fill your own cup before you fill someone else's. And if you don't take the time to sit and genuinely just listen to yourself and tune into your body and your nervous system and like recalibrate, you may get confused. You may get confused by your willingness and desire to be compassionate and create positive action. Sometimes our own inner demons wear those desires as a costume, speaking of fashion. And so, being able to suss that out, I think ultimately helps you do the best work that you can, and also ultimately leads you into being in alignment with your purpose and your true purpose, not the purpose you feel like you're latching on to because it's the thing you can put out now instead of focusing on the deeper thing. Because I see that all the time, and I think that's something that's not talked about as much as it should be.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say everybody needs to rewind and go back and listen to that section at least one more time, because there was so much there and so much to really, like you said, sit with, both literally and figuratively there.
Yeah, get a good cushion. Like, that's the thing. Get a good cushion.
Fantastic. Wow. And you said an unexpected answer, and it truly was, and it was so exactly what I know I needed to hear, and I'm sure lots of people will agree. So thank you for that. Jonathan, please, where can we find you, follow you, find your book, all of it?
Certainly. Well, on a good note, we sold out of the first printing, but you can get your pre-order on shop.littleredfashion.com is where you can absolutely find a copy of the Little Red Dress, and soon the downloadable workbook for 3rd grade, which will be priced at $4.99, because fashion is for everyone, and who doesn't love some saucy activities? As far as myself personally, I am on Instagram at TheRealJJoseph. You can also learn more about Little Red Fashion and meet some of our advisory team at littleredfashion.com. We are also podcasters as well. We have our Little Red Village podcast available on all streaming platforms, which is where we dive into the who, what, when, where, why, and how of fashion with fashion industry professionals in the service of explaining to kids just how they got to where they are in the industry, what challenges they had, and what advice they have for kids who might want to do what they do sometime in fashion. And our second season that's off to a great start. For those of you who are interested in the plight of what's going on in the Ukraine, we interviewed a number of amazing Ukrainian designers discussing how the war has affected them and their business, and how they are designing through it. Some of them are really truly heroic, pivoting entire factories to producing tactical garments instead of ball gowns. I mean, very, very interesting and very impactful stories that we've been able to tell. So that is our Little Red Village podcast, as I said, available on all streaming platforms. And my personal website for anyone interested is therealjjoseph.com.
Excellent. Those will all be in the show notes as well if people are listening on the go. Thank you so much. I feel like we got like 5 different podcast episodes in one here today. There's so much. I personally can't wait to go back and revisit it all. Thank you for your time, for your passion, for what you're doing for our world.
Oh my God, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. I hope each and every one of you listening has enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to connecting with each and every one of you on social media.
Thanks so much for listening to Be the Good with Kate Chericello. Whether you're listening on YouTube or via podcast, it would mean the world if you liked, subscribed, and or left a review. You heard about the good? Now go out and be the good in your life this week. If you have stories of good news that need to be shared, please send me a message. Thanks again, and have a great week.